we are today guests of Jadwiga and Sir Julian. Hello.
Hello.
I would like to ask you why you chose this place to live. Why exactly here?
Well, the answer to that is that the owner of this place is Jadwiga Łopata, and Jadwiga and I met in London in the year 2000, which is 20 years ago. And she was representing an organization called Ashoka, which was entrepreneurs who were doing unusual work with people, social entrepreneurs. And she was an example of someone from Poland who was doing interesting work in the realm of farming and tourism. She was helping farmers who have a very small income earn extra money through offering their homes as a tourist facility. And I met her because I was invited to come to hear these Ashoka fellows, as they call them, from various parts of the world telling their stories. And I remember she gave a presentation, slide presentation, and she was explaining and showing how beautiful the biodiversity is in Poland, how rich the meadows were, the spuli łąk. And she was saying this is under threat, severe threat, because of modern monocultural chemical agriculture. And that the old traditions practiced in Poland, still at that time by quite a lot of farmers, will not survive unless people change their habits about the food they buy, where they buy it from, and their attitude to the land and to nature. And this is very much what I was involved with, because I was one of the early pioneers, in a way, of organic farming in England. I started converting my farm in 1975. And I held the 4th licensed organic farming certificate at that time. As I registered organic farmer number 4. And it was a small club of people who were pioneering an approach to our farming, which is pretty unaccepted in those days, because it didn't fit at all the idea that you use agrochemicals and you don't need to rotate your crops and all the rest of it. So when Jadwiga had given her talk, I spoke to her. I said I was very interested by this. I'm coming from a farming background. I have a farm. I'm practicing organic farming. And she said, oh, yes. And then she said, well, we're having a meeting in Poland coming up in November. And it's initiating a new organization which I want to try and start, called Międzynarodowy Coalicja dla Ochrony Polskiej Wsi. And I said, what? What's that? What language is that? Oh, the International Coalition to Protect the Polish Countryside.
Yes.
And maybe you'd like to come over. I said, wow, it's a very tempting proposition, because I'm very interested. I'm fascinated even by the Polish countryside and by all the small farms in Poland. And I'm very interested how they survive and, what it's actually like on 2.5, 3 hectares to feed a family of 4 or 5 people, and the real peasant farming, the real hop, So she said, good, well then you come over, I'll send you an invitation. So I went. Cut a long story short, and I remember very clearly the meeting in a house in Zawoja, near here, and how Jadwiga felt that I could be very helpful in the attempt to alert people to the danger of this modern farming in Poland. And I was elected to be on the board of this organization, International Coalition to Protect the Polish Countryside. And while I thought it was impossible and I couldn't do it, Jadwiga explained to me that I definitely could, and it was just a question of making up my mind, and she would help in every way she could to support, initially financially and all the rest of it. So I came, and what happened was we came here. And this was the centre where ICPPC, International Coalition to Protect the Polish Countryside, had its office and where everything happened.
So you didn't visit Poland before you met Jadwiga?
Never been to Poland before. Although I'd had two interesting experiences with Polish people. Mm-hmm. One when I was a very young child, and the man who swept the chimneys in our house was Polish.
Okay.
He came from a small Polish community in the village that had been established during the Second World War, I think. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I was fascinated by him as well, oddly enough. He didn't speak much. He was very quiet and he was very efficient, but he gave off a certain aura which interested me. Uh-huh. And then later, when I was living and working in Australia in my early 20s, I developed quite a strong friendship with a Polish man, and he told me a little bit about Poland and one thing. But that was all. So this was the first time. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because it can be also every place in the world, but this argument that the Poland still have these small farms and this very traditional agriculture, I would say, this convinced you to came here, right?
Well, it was that initially. It really was that. I think there must have been some other force almost working on me, I think, because what happened when I did come here was a whole lot of things sort of came together in my life, which probably never would have if I hadn't come. Right outside the issue of purely food and farming, largely through people I met via Jadwiga, and healers, for instance, and very spiritually thoughtful people. A whole genre of people who I wouldn't have ever met in England, I don't think. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And now here you are running the project of EKOCENTRE.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the things we're doing.
And I've heard that the people came here to visit you under some conditions, I think, right? Is it right? Or
I'm not sure of the question. Perhaps you can phrase it slightly differently. Conditions in what sense?
Because Jadwiga said that you can visit this EKOCENTRUM, but you have to, I don't know, write an email or something, ask whether it is possible or not.
Yes.
So is there some extra conditions or anybody can visit you here?
We used to make it very wide open. When I first came, we had it very wide open, but what happened was it was extremely difficult to organise our own campaigning work and all the other things we needed to do around this sort of very open-ended approach. So we decided we'd have to say we have specific hours when we will show people around, and we have others where we don't. And that's got in the rather smaller in recent times, because we would have liked younger people to have got involved with us many years ago and taken over some of these tasks, you know. But we didn't. We had a lot of people who said they'd be very interested, and they're very interested by what's going on, and they think it's great and everything. But we haven't yet found anyone who wants to actually, so to speak, use their experience here and try and replicate this or offer themselves to help give talks and show people around and all that, because it's pretty time consuming. We usually give about an hour, 2 hours, you know, to people for a very small amount of money, actually. But, so, you know, it's all practical stuff. Yeah. But in principle, we're here very much to try and show what you can do using alternative forms of technology, alternative forms of organic farming as opposed to non-organic farming, how you can work with clean water systems, solar energy, passive and active, herbal gardens for medicine, all these things put together. So you'd see what comes out of it is a lifestyle change for society as a whole. And that's where it gets really interesting for people, because they start thinking, oh, well, maybe we could move out of Warsaw, you know, and actually adopt this completely different lifestyle. where we're more working with nature, more in touch with the elements, more close to the natural principles of energy, and especially if we're going to have a family.
Yes, yes.
Because it gets increasingly dangerous in cities with all the electromagnetic smog and all the pollution that exists. And people are beginning to really understand this now. But we were warning this 20 years ago. We were saying it will get worse and you ought to get going now. And so, because it takes time, you can't just suddenly start a farm from nothing. You have to have some experience.
Okay, so coming here, one can learn how to plant some herbal, some plants which can be used then so many in many cases, right?
Yes, that's right. And also ordinary, how to grow wheat, barley, oats, and how to do all that stuff. What the basic you might need if you're going to try and be self-sufficient in your life, or semi-self-sufficient.
Yes, and I have a question also about this passive architecture or houses, because you have something here already. There is a small house, and do you make workshops here also for people to educate them how to build such a passive houses?
We do. We have clay straw house, Klimasłoma domu, and this is from an old Polish tradition.
Yes.
Of which, before I got involved, Jadwiga's son, when he was a teenager, got extremely interested in. And he found an older man, I think a man in his mid-70s in the village, Strisha, who still knew how to do this traditional building out of clay and straw. And he and this man and a few other helpers built this house you're referring to.
Yes.
Clay straw house with passive solar heating, one photovoltaic panel actually, for energy, for light bulb, a little bit of electric light just to see what you're doing in there. And we give a workshop called Building the Ark, Budowy Arki. Budowanie Arki. And we do those once every 2 months. And we have people come all over Poland, and sometimes overseas, and we give them 1.5 day combination of lectures and hands-on experience.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and that's the best mix, obviously.
Yes.
Because people definitely need to experience the reality, so that's the hands-on bit, but they also need to know the theory.
Yeah.
So
no theory without practice. This is
precisely.
It doesn't go that way.
That is absolutely right.
Yes, and you also have in this house beautiful like a greenhouse, and this part of the house is warming the other one, right?
Yes, that's right. Well, this is really significant because actually, funnily enough, in England, this type of approach was very popular in the 19th century. And the Victorians, and early 20th century too, the Victorians built what we call orangeries in England.
Yes, I know it.
For growing citrus fruits.
I know the topic.
You
topic very well.
Okay, so this is really the same principle, which is you build onto your house, a nice solar collecting area which concentrates the heat, the photons of the sun's energy, into an area and heats it. Now, what's a bit special about that one is it's also got a clay floor, and clay absorbs the heat and holds the heat. So, you can walk in there in bare feet, and you can get, in a nice...
And it's warm.
And it's warm. It stays warm for quite a long time, 24 hours at least, even if the temperature drops. So it's... So you have this situation where you've got a good place for starting new plants, particularly when you're starting tomatoes, for instance. Have them very, very small in little pots.
Yeah.
And then you want a place where it's very nice ambient temperature and natural sunlight and all the rest of it. And we start them there, and then you take them out and you plant them in the field later on. We use it for that purpose mostly, this little extension. And it does warm the rest of the house too. So yes, Well, now this house behind where we're sitting is another example of how that works, because In this house, in England, we call them long houses. They exist in the West Country, in Devon and Cornwall.
Okay.
They still do, very similar to this one. And so you have one half with your cows in it, right? And chickens and pigs.
Yes, yes, yes.
And you have, you know all about it,
Yes,
of course.
yes.
And then you have the other half where you live. And the point is, obviously, you know, one half warms the other half.
Yes. There was also such a solution in Poland a long time ago, but it was practiced.
So that's the point. And now this is not considered hygienic.
Yes.
Under the European Union, we've had to get rid of all these most important and vital traditions for the sake of very abstract and actually completely wrong concepts about health, what it really is. And this has been a disaster for everyone in Europe. That we've been all our best farming traditions and food health traditions have been completely ruined by health and safety and hygiene conditions being imposed, which are actually very bad for people. It's like wearing a mask during coronavirus. I mean, it's foolish in every respect, and it's also very bad for you. You're re-inhaling your own germs all the time. But you know, we're forced into this sort of thing by people who have never lived close to the ground. They've only got ideas in their heads.
Yeah. I also saw the Beak Domes, which are also made. I don't know whether you made it or together with Jadwiga or somebody was helping you to build these constructions. They are very famous, I think, right now because I don't know how does it called exactly, but I know these domes already.
Yeah, sort of geodesic type dome.
That's right.
And hexagonal.
Hexagonal domes.
They're wonderful.
Yeah.
They're wonderful. I mean, they're really interesting because the fact that they're hexagonal, they have a whole number of different angles. Now, when the sun rises in the morning, quite obviously the sun's coming in a very parallel angle with the ground.
Yes.
But as it rises, coming in on all different angles, so as to optimize the amount of energy you're getting from each of these angles, you have a whole series of
collecting of the light.
Exactly. And it adds, we think, around about 25 or 30% quicker and faster growth of the plants that are in there. And they thrive on those conditions too, actually. They thrive. They're very strong and very healthy.
Yes, I saw when you have a normal greenhouse and the plants inside, and in this hexagonal domes, the plants were much bigger.
They are. I mean, this is a very good example this year, actually.
Yeah.
That we now have a comparison we can make between the two different types of greenhouses, where the soil's almost identical.
Yeah.
And you can see a huge difference. And
this is amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing, but there's a certain logic to it, of course, which is something, well, we were discussing earlier on, you and I were discussing the whole issue of looking at things in more than one-dimensional way. You might say a four-dimensional way. Yeah. More than just three-dimensional way.
Yes.
And that's when you start getting into not only hexagonal greenhouses, but things like biodynamic farming principles and what have you, where you're working with the elements, including the astrological elements. Yes, and that's what we're also doing here to a degree, at least. We don't follow it religiously, but we do follow Steiner's practice of planting the appropriate
in
plants.
Specific days.
Yes, on the specific days in relation to the solar cycle, the lunar cycle, and various other cycles. And we observe, yes, there does appear to be
that it works.
That it is working. And you know what else they have in this calendar? They have Biodynamic Calendar. Many people in Poland use it, farmers use it. It's amazingly accurate with the weather forecast. Now, this is something you know a lot about. It's amazingly accurate. It's more accurate than getting on a computer and watching someone else who's bought, or some institute that spent 20 million zlotys on a new computer. And the old biodynamic calendar is always more accurate. That tells you something.
Yes, and it also helps you as a man itself to grow your plants much better and then are much healthier and so on. Okay, so maybe we can invite you, maybe not you, but you, maybe we can invite you to visit this eco center.
Tak, we'd be delighted to invite anybody who finds this conversation of interest, especially people who are looking to create a new lifestyle in the countryside and possibly even a community of people.
Or transform their gardens into some agriculture. Right?
Absolutely. We note with disappointment that many places in the countryside, in villages now, are imitating the more urban garden in their design, and they're cutting out the vegetables and putting in more and more almost perfect flowers and grasses and things, and even using Roundup and agrochemical sprays to get rid of the weeds. And this is something we want to discourage. We want to encourage people to look back into the time-tested traditions of how this fed people for hundreds of years, using the qualities that the land has and that almost every garden has right in front of it. So rather than go off to Biedronka and buy your nie warzywa,
no vegetables,
bardzo stare warzywa, globalist warzywa, you have them right outside your door and your fruit. And when you go and you pick a piece of that fruit or that vegetable whenever you want, and you have it really fresh, you get this whoop of energy.
Yes.
You know, the difference is phenomenal.
Yes, I know this.
Yeah.
I know this. Okay.
To jest drugi świat.
Drugi świat. Much better word. So we invite you kindly to visit EKOCENTRUM in Streczów and to visit Sir Julian and Jadwiga, just to know everything what they know, just to find some very, very important information about life. And not only about the new level of life, which you can introduce into your life now. So,
and then I think you put it very nicely. And I would say that we are increasingly going to need the simple knowledge base, which almost everybody had 30 or 40 years ago. And it starts with how to grow your own food.
Yes.
We're going to need it.
Yes.
I'm not going to get into that subject. I write a great deal about this, and I've written books and stuff, and people can read my essays on www.renaissance.21, my website in Polish, where I talk a lot about how in...
Proszę cię, bo my nagrywamy teraz. We make a video.
No, dziecko jest bardzo ważne in this situation. So that the skills are not of a bygone era, not of the past. They're skills which we will need again in the future. So it's increasingly important, I think. That's my message.
Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you, Julian.
Dziękuję bardzo.